I'm Tanessa Limo, and today I'm accompanied by two amazing guests.
Ebenezer Matthew, and I'm privileged to be the United Nations Youth Delegate representing Tanzania to the United Nations General Assembly this year. And it's an honor to actually represent the voices of youth here in Tanzania to the big summits like the high-level political forums and the third committees and the SDGs summit in New York. So it's really vibrant to be in a dialogue that precurses the big event.
I would like to pick something from you, Ebenezer, since we're going to discuss about climate justice, gender equality, and human rights. I would like to ask you, street children, and we've seen that there's also underage kids who have been sentenced to jail. What do you think should be done to mitigate this for our future outlook?
Well, first of all, we should understand the context where that unemployment stands in. Unemployment means the level of human capital and how this human capital is able to leverage the resources around and utilize this to create more economic opportunities. So if there are factors that hinder this human capital to develop, that means we create more chances of unemployment occurrence. So we see climate change actually came to be a hurdle, a wall between achieving quality education, but also making sure that everybody has food security and parts of human health status. So we've seen a lot of decline in the production areas in the agricultural sectors where there is more decline in food productions, but also the quality of education where a lot of school dropouts arise because they have to make sure at home there is a more economic environment that enables them to achieve their education. So unemployment arises because of that in general. But as we have seen, human rights are on the same direct path as the opportunities that surround us. So you can have human rights, but you have to be surrounded by a lot of factors that give these rights a sense of nature. So if a child has to go fetch waters a long distance from their place to take shower before school because of climate change, and if a child has to suffer in terms of making sure they have food security at home, all these factors actually make these children see education as a very heavy obligation, and it actually cuts them off and acts as a negative impact for them to actually achieve what they have in the long run. So unemployment keeps on increasing, and of course it has been an increasing factor over time, but because of climate change it has actually become a catalyst to speed up the spread of this effect. And as Tanzania, in order to mitigate this, first of all, I think it's really important to make use of green opportunities, green jobs that are that could maybe cover the gap that has arisen due to climate change. In the previous years, we have seen a lot of employment opportunities where people cut down trees to create charcoal for energy, for example, or even creation of timber. So deforestation was part of economic opportunity, and employment was in that sense. But because of climate change, and we have to shift patterns, we have to shift stages of making sure that we have renewable energy. So all these opportunities actually vanished out. So how are we able to create a space where more opportunities arise while also mitigating climate change? So creating of this green circular economy, that will be a very first step in mitigation of this. But also, we have seen after the COP28 this year, where there was a lot of agreements and resolutions on climate financing and increasing climate resilience and climate justice throughout, where some states were obligated to finance the least privileged states. So all these were actually agreed, but none of them were ratified. So in order to mitigate all the African countries and the world in general, everyone has to play their role in climate financing and ensuring that everything is in space where we can actually cover the impact of climate change throughout. So we have seen there's a lot of innovations, a lot of solutions that youth and young people come up with. I have been part of a lot of hackathons where they come with adaptive ways on how we can combat climate change, but the chances of them excelling and making this maybe on a larger impact is actually cut down because of the financial hurdle. So climate financing is really important if we want to curb climate change in the long run. But also it's very important to make sure that we have local resilience in terms of making sure that we curb climate change. Climate change has of course, we were looking at how we can change technologies and change patterns of productions and all that. but what can we do in our local sense? Not all these machines can be built in every village, in every country. That's almost impossible. But there is some very rural areas that have arid land affected with climate change. So how are we taking the local value chains and local indigenous methods in actually curbing this? What do we have? What sustainable practices can we actually input in this? And we have seen there is the BBT project that has been going on in Tanzania, that smart climate agriculture is actually given a priority. So all these initiatives should actually be brought up to space in order to make sure that we create a world where it's more resilient to climate change.
You're doing an amazing job. In your Instagram, I've gone by, and I think the organization TGNP is doing amazing work. What's the relationship between gender equality and climate change?
Okay, the relationship with gender equality and climate change. First of all, we need to understand what gender equality means. Gender equality is when either women, men, children, elders, even those in the most vulnerable groups, that is, I'm talking about those people living with disabilities, are able to receive the same type of treatment. That's not discrimination, but also at the same time they can be able to access different opportunities. They can be able to access, they can be able to tap into different opportunities. They can be able to access it, but also at the same time they are given those opportunities. And they are given that same level playing field whereby at least everyone is benefiting. Yes. Now, when it comes to the relationship between gender equality and climate, in terms of action or in terms of the change, is that you find we take in the context, in African context, we go towards the urban and the rural. Or in geographical context, we see that the people who are actually most affected with climate change is the women, children, elderly, because these people are mainly dependent. They're dependent on males to provide for the family. And this is in terms, because these people are, because men are the ones who actually earn the most than women. So anything that affects men affects women the most. So let's see it with cutting down trees, accessing water. With cutting down trees, you can see like people cut down trees for firewood, charcoal. So this woman, at the end of the day, she's going to use that firewood and charcoal to cook food, but at the end of the result, is that even the water sources diminish, or there's environmental degradation. With the environmental degradation, also happens with the environmental sources. They sort of get depleted the amount of water. So she will have to either look for another alternative. That means walking long distances to be able to access that water. Through that distance that she's going to walk, safety-wise, she's not safe. She can encounter gender-based violence. We can see that they're either raped or abused in any kind of form. And then there is encountering wild animals during the distance she's going to be able to fetch water, but also the time she's going to use to fetch that water and then come back and do the domestic parts of the domestic chores at home. So we also have to look at climate change with an eye, or sort of kwa jicho ya jinsia. Yes, kwa jicho la jinsia. So when ukiangalia kwa jicho la jinsia, when you look at climate change kwa jicho la jinsia, which means you look at a focus of embedding gender justice within it. So when you embed gender justice with climate justice and contextualize it into where these people live, I'm talking about women, girls, men. Let's not forget the men, because men are also part of the gender issues. And when we put them within that same kind of context, we also have to look at how they are living, their communities, because each community is different. The social norms, how they engage in productive activities, reproductive activities, and also how their roles play within their homes. Also affects how, also has an effect on how climate change also affects them. On how climate change affects them. So you find that women being more vulnerable is that they are with production of charcoal, that is solid biomass fuel. Women normally are the end users, but also them continuously using this also affects them health-wise. But also at the same time is that there will be women being the end users of or them being the biggest consumers of solid biomass fuel, that is charcoal. In terms of charcoal, is that even when they bring in these policies or laws that are meant to regulate or bring in forth climate action, we should also look at them, because at the end of the day, where are they going to access clean gas? They don't have income. They don't have income. There's nothing they're actually doing to actually gain that income. But at the same time, they're dependent on their husbands to provide them income. Okay. So we need women to actually be able to speak out, to voice out. So we need children. We need the elderly to be able to form opinions, so that the government can actually know what is needed, and in concern to different geographical areas, because what is in Kilimanjaro is different from what is in Dar es Salaam. What is in Arusha is what is different from Kigoma, Mtwara. So we have to look at different types of contexts and how climate change affects them.
Who do you think is responsible in fighting against climate change?
But I would like women to be agents of change, more agents of change, because we aren't actually speaking about this, because most of the leadership roles are taken by men. It comes from family level, community levels, even government levels. We find less and less participation of women into dialogues, national dialogues, into any kind of decision making, to be able to form a consensus that will actually help them. And in this way, there is need for a gender responsive budgeting and planning. With gender responsive budgeting and planning, I'm saying in terms of when I said kuangalia kwa jicho la kijinsia, or to put it in a focus, or in a way that you have to make sure you emphasize gender into climate justice, is that you have to make sure that you analyze how the effects of climate change affect everyone. And I'm talking about men, I'm talking about women, I'm talking about children, I'm talking about the elderly, those people who are living with disabilities. You look at how climate change actually affects them. And when you be able to look at that, you'll be able to form strategies that will actually, which when applicable, they won't leave someone behind, meaning that everyone will have it placed with equality and equity at the same time. Because with equity is that you will receive benefits according to your situation. So when you analyze people's situations, you have to give them the benefits, or you have to provide them you have to provide them finances or some sort of technological support that will be able to focus them in their specific contexts. So in that aspect, I'm talking about you have to make sure whatever you're putting or whatever you strategize has to be transformative, but also sensitive. Yes.
I would like to hear from you. What do you think of our future outlook concerning climate change? What should be done to mitigate climate change?
Well, first of all, I was honored to participate in the Children and Youth Dialogue on Climate as a precursor to the African Head Summit on climate that's going to happen in a few days from now. And in all the discussions that we've had, I as the UN Youth Delegate So it's really important if the governments of African states, Tanzania specifically, to focus on what are we creating, what generation are we creating, what people, the children that we have right now, the youth that we have, are we making sure that they carry this solidarity on making sure that our environment is in safe hands for the future days to come. You know, all the values that we have, all the traditions that we carry inside us, the songs of patriotism and everything, it's all because when we're very young, we were told that this is the way, and we carry that throughout our life. So if at one point in early childhood education or even primary school or even throughout the education curriculum, we could include topics related to climate and on how the importance of making sure that our climate is very important to us, the connections between us and our environment, so as to impact the spirit of making sure that we focus directly on what exactly is for our future. But also it's really important if we as the African nations come up with ways to adapt and making sure that we are ready when these things happen. You know, climate change comes with imbalances and climate extremism. We see droughts, heavy rainfalls that floods a lot of villages in recent news. And all this is because we're not focused on preparing ourselves to be ready when these things happen. We're focused on making sure that maybe the future is in safe hands, but we're not focused on what exactly can we do right now to adapt. So before mitigation, maybe we could make sure that we are more resilient in creating adaptive systems that are there to keep us safe, to safeguard the environment and the villages that we are in right now. So if we can come up with ways to curb drought or maybe protect ourselves from heavy rainfall by creating important channels and maybe different infrastructure and urban planning that is more adaptive to climate change. That will be really important to minimize the impact of climate change. But also, in all that we're doing, awareness is really important. So how is the government, how are the states supporting local initiatives or organizations that are trying out there to create awareness? These initiatives, how are we supporting them? I've been part of a lot of initiatives, but the impact hasn't been that big because all these maybe let's say NGOs or CSOs are able to just be in front of a very small group of people, like 100 or 200, but we're talking about 65 million throughout the country. We're talking about all African countries. So the impact is really crucial but very small. So how is the government maybe putting up policies, putting up funds, all this financing to make sure that these initiatives are not only benefiting the maybe the urban side of our world, but also the very essence of our people in the areas that are more vulnerable and are marginalized in one sense or another. So these things I really took out from the dialogue that we've had with my fellow youth and children in our country. And of course, it's really important if the summit that's going to happen, heads of state come up and think it's really important to make sure that these values are incorporated inside the hearts throughout the education system, but also our awareness programs, in order that everybody should feel the sense of the responsibility towards combating this. You asked the question that who is responsible to actually maybe curb climate change. I would say if we look at it in a sense that we're waiting for the government to do something, at one sense I feel it's really selfish. It's actually every individual's responsibility to do this. So as we were dialoguing here towards the summit, if I was able to stand in front of the youth and the children, the women and the men of our country, the countrymen, I would say it's not about pointing hands and playing the blame game, but it's now our responsibility to actually making sure that we stand. So it starts from you picking up, maybe doing some beach cleanups around your house. It's you starting from making sure that you don't cut trees and warn your neighbor. It starts from making sure that our children have these values from the very beginning. So it starts from the family level, from the individual level, that we come up as a society and making sure that we prepare each other for more responsibilities that of course will create a more sustainable future towards the development of our countries.
What message do you have to our viewers or the government, even Madam President Dr. Samia Suluhu, who is watching us right now? What message do you have or input do you have concerning climate change?
Is let's not forget to be to include gender justice when you're doing any kind of action that is put towards climate change is that even when you strategize or put policies or incentives, or if there is actually need for subsidies, because when we are trying to go in a just or transformative change that is towards emphasizing on climate change action, we should ensure that we should emphasize on gender justice. And with emphasizing is that you have to include the voices of every Tanzanian into whatever output she's going to put there. Is that she should make sure she has opinions, and that can be done through any kind of surveys or opinion polls, but should have an evidence sort of based approach that should be put into making sure they actually get something that is reliable to come up with solutions. But also at the same time, I would like not within climate change that they should only just emphasize on gender responsive budgeting or planning. It's within every kind of issue that the government does, whether it is with infrastructure, whether it's with infrastructure that's in terms of social infrastructure and physical infrastructure, that's in terms of energy, the energy sector, because the energy sector actually is there is a sort of a relationship between the energy sector and the climate sector. So we should also look at vulnerable groups, those who are most vulnerable to climate change, that they should be able to actually be heard. And whatever is being put out there should have a sort of a human rights sort of approach, that whatever is being discussed is also favorable to those who are the most vulnerable.